How's everybody's bees doing? Are they still alive or are they not doing so well?
Mine are alive as far as I know, all of them.
How many did you overwinter?
I got eight.
Eight? Oh, good. Well, as far as I can tell, I started with 38 and I've lost two that I know of. The last I checked a couple of weeks ago. And one was not real surprising. It was a small colony to start with and um, wasn't real surprised with it, but the other one was a big colony. I'm not sure what happened to it. I kind of think it got trapped down in the bottom during one of the cold snaps and couldn't move to get over onto honey. They still had honey stores left and a big population. So I'm a little surprised that they didn't make it, but for some reason they did not.
Oh, I figured out how to unmute finally. This is Janine Tanner. My husband met you over at the Jenkins house over here in the Mazer area this last year. And we've
Oh,
had these a couple of times. But this year we started with Saskatraz, not super amazing beekeepers, but they've done really well. We have four really full, super active hives that we've just kept an eye on their feed, and they've been doing pretty good so far. So we'll see how it turns out.
cool. How have the Saskatraz been for just overall? Are they are they gentle? Are
And
they
being an amateur, knowing a ton, um, they've been, at least for us, they've been super hardy. There's just so many bees. I don't know much about anything, but it seems to me that with as warm as we've been over here and they're in the sun, I mean, they're just coming out every day, tons of them. And I kind of been like worried when we had so many days a couple weeks ago when it was getting close. We're up at 51, 52, 53. I'm like, oh man, are they all going to swarm and die? Should we add another box on? I just didn't really know what to do about it. And so it's kind of one of the reasons why I'm joining this meeting tonight is what do we do when it gets super warm way
like
early and they're
to
super active and they've eaten through a ton of honey and you're putting sugar in there and
okay, we can dig into that a little bit tonight.
okay,
Because some of my bees are doing the exact same thing. And
awesome.
um I can tell you, don't fret yet.
Okay.
You're they shouldn't they're not going to swarm yet. So
Just to keep them fed and make
okay.
sure that and so far that's worked just fine.
Yeah,
So
that's a good way to do it as long as you get enough a warm enough day that you dare open the hive.
yeah,
And really just if all you're going to do is just slip in a frame of food, um, you can do that pretty quick, even when it's pretty cold. I'd wait until the middle of the day, and hopefully it's hitting 40 or something. If you need to, I prefer not to open my hive too much until we start hitting the 50s. When we start hitting the 50s, then I'll pop the lid and kind of take a peek. I won't really pull frames out. Not trying to disturb that cluster yet, but the cluster will be fairly loose at 50 degrees. As it gets colder, they really tighten right up, and when they're snug and tight like that, you don't really want to disturb them. But at 50, that cluster is going to expand quite a bit, and you can slip in and drop in a feed frame or something. So sounds like
yeah,
you're doing just right.
it's worked pretty good so far. And yeah, it was when we were getting here where we're at. We were above 54 a couple of days and they were just going crazy. They were all over and everything for about a week, just sucking up water everywhere. So we made sure we had some water out during the day that wasn't frozen. And that's when we put the honey in with them. So
Yeah, That's exactly what they're going to do right now. They're going to go out. They're looking for water. They're looking to any kind of food source that they can find, but obviously there's nothing out there for them. So they're burning resources. They're burning through their honey trying to find something, and there's nothing out there for them. So from here, probably till we get pollen and nectar coming in, is probably the hardest time to get bees through winter. People will get them this far and they think, oh, I'm okay. And then they kind of leave them alone and forget about them. And then the bees starve to death because there's just nothing out there for them. And they're burning fuel, and they don't have enough to in the hive to get them through till about April, when things start to bloom. Then there'll be stuff coming in. So if your hives are light on stores now, just plan on feeding from here till April. You're going to have to, in order to keep them going.
So Glade,
Mm-hmm.
you had asked if, or how many we had, and then my computer decided to, anyway, I'm back. But I've got 3 hives, and I see them out flying around on a sunny, warm day, but I say warm, it's 35, 40 degrees, it's not warm. And I think I left them plenty of frames, but that was then, and a nice warm, I've seen them out a lot of times. What do I feed them? When do I check them, and how? I'm new at this.
Okay.
It's my first winter.
So I will check my hive. The easiest thing for me to do to kind of get an idea of whether the hive has food or not is go lift up the back. I'm not trying to pick up the whole hive. I'm just trying to lift kind of the back of the hive a little bit to kind of get an idea of how heavy it is. And I've done it enough that I can tell whether or not the hive's really light, or if it still feels like a box of rocks, then I'm not worried about it. But if the hive feels light, then I'm going to do a little more digging. I'm going to pop the top cover off. I'm going to look down from the top. I'm not going to pull any boxes apart. I'm not going to pull any frames out unless I really feel like I need to dig further. But usually I can just pop the top off and kind of look down between the frames, and you can usually see where the cluster's at. If the cluster is still down quite low and the frames above the cluster still have honey in them, and you can take your hive tool and kind of poke down in those frames a little bit. If there's still honey up above the clusters, then I'm good, and I'm just going to put the lid back on them and leave them for a little while, and then in a couple of weeks I'll do it again. If that cluster is clear up to the top, and so when you pull that top lid off and that cluster is right there clinging to the top lid, then they're hungry. They've probably burned through all of their stores at that point. There may be a few honey frames on the very outside down low, but if that cluster is clear up top of the hive, right up against the inner cover, the bottom of the inner cover, then they're probably hungry. And at that point, then I'm going to give them some sugar. Unless you do, if you've stored if you've kept back some honey frames, then you can do what? Tell me your name again. Zanine?
It's Janine. It's like
Janine?
Jaffa.
Okay.
Yeah, Janine Tanner. My husband's
Okay.
Joseph. Yeah.
Okay, Janine, you're doing exactly. The other option is just pull out an empty frame and drop in a frame of honey. That works great too. But if you don't have that, then the only thing you can really do is give them some sugar. So what I'll do, all of my hives, how to see if I can find a picture here. and share with you. Hang on. This might be easier if I can share a picture quickly. I have some shims that I've made. I call them shims. They're just a rim or a frame that's the same size as your hive bodies. Oh, I know I've got some pictures here somewhere. Okay. Let's see if I can do this. Okay. Pull that out of the way for a second. So I've made some shims. They're just a frame the same size as the hive body, and I've put some hardware cloth. I think this is 1/2 inch on the bottom, so it comes out looking kind of like this. There's the, and then I made a whole bunch of them, and then what I do is I just pack those shims. I put a little bit of newspaper in them, and then I just pack that with some sugar that I've dampened. You can use water. I actually like to use apple cider vinegar when I do this. The vinegar helps retard the mold. If you just use water and there's too much moisture in the hive, then the sugar can mold a little bit. But I found that if I just use apple cider vinegar, I don't have that problem. So all I'm doing is just kind of packing, put a layer of piece of newspaper in the bottom, and then I cut a hole right in the middle so the bees can come up through. And then I just pack it with sugar that's been moistened. I'm not trying to dissolve the sugar. I'm just trying to give it enough moisture to pack a little bit, kind of like wet sand. And this is what they look like when they're done. And then I throw these on my hives earlier in the right before winter really starts, about 1st of November. I'll throw these on my hives, and like I say, it's plain sugar, it's apple cider vinegar, nothing fancy about it. This year, the year that I took these photos, I was getting them on a little bit late, but you can see all I'm doing is just cracking the lid, throw the shim underneath, and put the lid back on top. Is all I'm doing with them. And the bees, you can't see the hole behind my hive tool right here, but there's a hole right here in the middle that the bees can come up through, and they'll feed on that sugar. They'll tear that newspaper apart too. Once they kind of figure out that there's sugar up here, they'll tear into that newspaper, and out in front of your hive, you'll find in front of the entrance, you'll find little shreds of newspaper as they've shredded it apart, drag it down through the hive, and kicked it out the entrance. So there you can see I'm just throwing them on my hive, and you can do this as long as you've got some space in there. You just need, this might be a little bit more than you actually need. You'll really only need about an inch and a half rim around these to do this. It's just not hard. And if you don't want to use sugar, if you do have some leftover honey, and I would recommend you only use your own honey, not somebody else's honey, that you've got in a bucket or something, you can actually just fill a couple of Ziploc quart bags with honey and place the honey. Instead of using sugar, you can just place those Ziploc bags right on top of the frames, and take a razor blade and just cut a couple of slits in the bag, and the bees will come up and eat right through them. Let me see if I can find a different picture for you where I've done exactly that. I know I've got a picture somewhere where I've done exactly that. Oh, right here. Let's try this again. Okay. So here's my my shim that I made, and you can see how much of the sugar's left and how much of the newspaper's left. They've pretty much just shredded the newspaper. They've eaten through the sugar. And this is, if I remember right, I took this picture a couple of years ago, about this time of year. And these bees would starve to death if I did not feed them more. So you can see how much sugar's left, not tons of sugar left. That won't last them very long. So I just took some Ziploc baggies and filled them full of, I had some honey, and it was crystallized, which is fine. But I just filled up the Ziploc bags, laid them on the top, and then just took a sharp knife and cut 3 or 4 slits right on top of that bag. And the bees will come up and feed right through the bag. You can see this one right here. They've pretty well eaten out that whole corner, and they'll do the same here. You'll notice right here, I've got a pollen patty. So this was probably late February, early March. So it's a little bit early to be putting on a pollen patty quite yet. I wouldn't do that quite yet. But if your bees are hungry, dry sugar or honey is your best option. You can also use fondant, baker's fondant. A lot of people like it. I just find the sugar to be really easy and convenient, and so that's what I use. And I'll just keep putting sugar on them from now until there's nectar starting to come in, which around here is not going to be probably till April. And I'll just keep an eye on them and make sure that they've got food. Does that help? Does that make sense?
Perfect answer. And I'm glad that you had pictures to show me. That really helped. I do have another question about pollen patties.
Okay.
And when do we go with that? Okay,
so let's kind of talk about a little more about just feeding bees in general. It's a little bit of I don't know how to put this. Just because they're bees and the bees take care of themselves, that's kind of the mentality some people have, that just leave them alone, they'll take care of themselves. That's just not always the case. We've taken bees and we've put them in a box. They're not domesticated, but we've altered their living arrangements quite a bit. And we're putting bees somewhere, especially honeybees, somewhere where maybe they wouldn't naturally be. I don't know how many know this, but honeybees are not native to North America or South America, the Americas at all. They are an imported species from Europe and Asia. So when we bring them out here in the basin, we have a tendency to think, well, there's plenty of food out there for them, but during the summer they should be fine, which may or may not be true. Around here, we do have periods of time when there is nothing for them to forage on. So winter is obvious, but even early spring, we have periods of time where the trees will start to bloom. The bees are bringing in pollen and nectar and things are looking good. And then we get a really hard frost. And when that happens, the plants quit producing pollen, quit producing nectar. There might be a 2-week lag in there where there's nothing for the bees to forage on. We think there is because it feels like spring outside, and if we get this really hard frost, then it just kind of turns everything off for a couple of weeks until the plants or new plants start to flower and bloom again. So we can get that dearth period even in the spring. What a lot of people also don't really understand is we're usually pretty good from May, June, July. Once we start getting into August, though, around here, we don't there's not much out there for them from about the middle of August clear through to November. Now there are some things blooming, things like rabbit brush, and there's usually some clovers and a few things blooming. But if you really think about your area and what things are right around you within that 2 to 3 mile radius of your hives, walk out and really look at what's blooming, not just what's green, but what's blooming. And once we get into August, you'll kind of go, oh, there's not tons out here. And that's what the bees experience. So around here, I find that we have to feed early in the spring and early in the fall to get them through fall and into winter. So if we want to feed bees, I like to feed for winter. You've got to feed them something that's not going to add moisture to the hive. So dry sugar works really well, fondant works well, and honey works well, because those aren't going to add a ton of moisture to the hive. If you try to feed them sugar syrup in the winter, syrup's got too much water content in it still. And now you're introducing a whole bunch of moisture into the hive that the bees have to deal with. And bees and water don't really mix. So they need to, they want that sugar syrup dehydrated down to the same consistency as honey. So for winter, I'm going to feed dry sugar, I'm going to feed fondant, or I'm going to feed them honey. Once we start getting into 55, 60 degree days where we're pretty well constantly up in that range, 60, 65, then you can kind of switch in the spring to sugar syrup. Now, when I do that in the spring, I'm feeding them to stimulate them. Is usually at that point, at this point right now, this time of year, I'm feeding them to keep them alive. I'm not feeding them to stimulate them. I don't want them to grow quite yet. I'm just trying to keep them alive, give them enough carbohydrates to keep them alive. But once we get into April, then if I need to feed them, I feed them because I want to stimulate them. I want them to grow. I want them to start building up. So bees will kind of take off if they feel like there's a nectar flow going on. And the way you stimulate that is feed them sugar syrup, 1-to-1 sugar syrup, or even thinner than that. You can go like 3/4 sugar to 1 part water. So you can actually thin that syrup down just a little bit, and that will stimulate the bees into thinking that there's a nectar flow. If there's a nectar flow, then they go, oh, okay, let's start building the hive back up. Let's start building population again. But in order to build population, they need protein. And there may be enough protein in the hive left over from last year to do that, and there may not be. So it kind of depends on the year. It kind of depends on your personal preference. But I like to give my bees some protein, so a pollen supplement, a pollen patty. And I usually will do that because I'm trying to stimulate my bees to take off and grow so that they're ready when the nectar flow really hits about the end of May. I want to already have a good population at that time because my goal is honey production. If your goal is not to really produce a ton of honey, then you may want to hold off providing that extra stimulation and just give them enough food to get them through until the natural stuff comes in. they'll always take the natural over whatever supplement you give them. If you put out sugar syrup and there's a good nectar flow going on, they won't touch it. If you put out a pollen patty and there's a good pollen flow, there's good pollen sources out there for them, they won't hardly touch it. They'll leave it alone. So I'm only feeding them when there's not a really good natural source out there. And I'll feed a pollen patty. For me, I like doing it about the end of March. I find that timing wise, that's usually pretty good to somewhere middle to end of March, maybe the 20th, 25th or something. Now I want to stimulate them so they start building up population. And if I find if I do that about that time of the year, then come April, then my bees start to look really good. And by mid-May, I've got really good populations going into that, our main nectar flow. So I won't feed pollen patties for another month, probably month and a half. I don't want to stimulate that brood production yet, but there's a little bit of play here. As you get into your hives and you look at your hives, the bees that are in that hive right now, in the next 2 months, are all going to die. That whole population has to turn over in the next couple of months. So all those bees have to be replaced. That means your queen has got to start laying pretty quickly here. She's probably already laying small patches of brood, like, maybe 20, 25 cells is all. And because that's all, and this all depends on cluster size. It all depends on your bee genetics. The Saskatraz and the Carniolans will probably not build too much brood right now. The Italians may go way overboard and try to raise more brood than they're really capable of keeping warm. Remember, the brood has to stay at about 93 degrees in order to be viable. So they've got to heat that brood area up to about 93 degrees, even in this cold of weather. And they will do that. And they're very capable of doing that and keeping that little bit of brood area warm, as long as they themselves have enough population and they have enough resources to do that. And resources, I mean pollen and nectar, protein and a carbohydrate, pollen and honey, or pollen and sugar. They've got to have that carbohydrate and that protein in order to raise brood. So the winter bees are physiologically different than summer bees. They have more fat bodies, and those fat bodies are that protein storage for the hive. Those winter bees will be the ones that are raising the new summer bees that are coming on. And if they've not got enough fat bodies, then they have a hard time doing that. So I like to give them, just to make sure that they've got enough protein in the hive, I like to give them a pollen patty, but I won't do it yet. Right now, I'm just trying to keep them alive and keep them going for another month. And then I'm going to start thinking, okay, let's see if I'm ready to get them stimulated and start really raising brood. If I think the weather's going to turn really cold and nasty, then I'll wait a little longer to start giving them pollen patties. If the weather turns warm and we're starting out fairly warm this spring, I have a feeling we might be in for an early spring. So I may start a little sooner, just depending on the weather. We'll see what happens in the next month. Does that help?
Perfect answer. Got it. Wait a month. I was about ready to start. I got some in the freezer. I was about to start thawing them out, but I might just wait now that I've
No,
talked to you.
yeah, I would wait on pollen patties for another month. Make sure they've got enough carbohydrate, make sure they've got enough either sugar or honey for another month, and then we can start giving it to them. And I might not give them a full pound of pollen patty yet. I might cut that in half and give them a half a pound and let them chew on that for 10 days and then give them another half a pound. If they just devour it, then I'll probably throw a full pound on them and let them chew on that for a while. Because if they just devour it, then they're going to take that protein from the pollen patty and they're going to convert that into brood. And they're going to encourage the queen to start to lay. And you need that right now. So it's kind of a tricky time because you've got old winter bees dying off and you need to replace every bee in the hive except for the queen. And that's all got to happen in the next 2 months. And if it doesn't, that spring turnover from winter bees to summer bees doesn't happen, or it's really slow to happen, and the winter bees die off faster than you've got new bees coming on, then your hive population shrinks. And if it shrinks too much, then you're done. They can't. I think there's kind of a critical mass where if they get too small, they just can't get themselves going and again. Come summer, March, we'll start middle of March, end of March, 1st of April. We're going to start getting into those 50, 55, 60, 65 degree days. And if they're still light on stores at that point, then I'm going to feed them sugar syrup. It'll be warm enough that they'll take it. And I'm not too worried about introducing a whole bunch of moisture into the hive. They can deal with it at that point. It's warm enough that it's not that big of an issue. And most likely they'll consume that sugar syrup and it's not going to get stored in the hive. They're just going to consume it. And it's not storage to them yet, right? It's fuel that they're going to use immediately.
I got lots more questions. I'm trying to be quiet and let somebody else ask a question, but we'll give them a couple minutes here, and if they don't, I'll hit you.
All right. Anybody else have any questions? So
I have a question.
Go ahead.
So,
Go ahead.
I noticed in your picture that you had what looked like maybe black tar paper around a hive, few hives on a pallet. That's something we've talked about is insulating hives. Some people say yay, some people say nay. I don't know in this area. Is it something that's a good thing? Is it an experimental thing? What do you think?
That is a subject that will get beekeepers talking and arguing about forever.
In your personal experience, what do you think?
Well, okay, I'll tell you what I've done.
Okay.
You want me to share pictures again? I'll do that.
That's up to you, but I just want to hear from
let me find pictures because sometimes that helps. So here's what I've started out doing. I've been doing this for, I think this is my 10th year doing bees. And the way I was taught was push your hives together. If you've got multiple hives, put them together. And if they're on a pallet, push them all together on the pallet. My hives are now on stands like this, and I usually have one on each end of the stand. So for winter, I'll push them up against each other, and their entrances are in the front. They're right next to each other. They're fine. It's not a big deal. And then I'll put my sugar shims on, the shims that I showed you earlier. And then I'll take a piece of black tar paper, and all I do is I just go up one side, across the top, down the other side, staple it down. And my hives all have an upper entrance. So I will cut a little hole right here for that upper entrance. The tar paper is not for insulation. Tar paper does not insulate. It does give a little bit of solar gain on a summer day, on a sunny day. So it'll add, I don't know, 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 degrees to the hive on a sunny day in the winter. It's not a lot, but it's a little. And I've done this, most years I've done this, and some years I just didn't have time to do it. And so my hives got pushed up next to each other and they didn't get any tar paper and they still did just fine. The theory behind this is the tar paper gives just a little bit of solar gain. It also provides a little bit of a windbreak. Not much, but a little bit. So we're talking incremental savings or incremental helps for the bees. Not this is not a make or break answer for the bees. The theory is in the winter, the bees are going to start down here in the bottom boxes. I run mediums. If this was deeps, you would have 2 deeps here. I have mediums, and so I have 3 mediums. It's the same volume of space. So in the beginning of winter, your bees theoretically are down in the bottom of your hive, and you have honey stores above them. And as they go through winter, they're going to consume those honey stores and work their way up. As they consume honey, they are going to expel moisture. They're breathing in the hive. And so they're adding moisture to the air. So the humidity in the hive is going up. And the theory is, well, if you let the humidity rise, they're also producing heat, right, to keep themselves warm. So they're producing warm, moist air, and that warm, moist air is going to rise to the top. It's going to hit this top cover, which is cold, and then it condenses. That warm, moist air condenses on the top cover and then rains back down on the bees, which is not good. That'll kill your bees in a heartbeat. So in order to avoid that, the theory is, okay, so let's give them an upper entrance, a hole for that warm, moist air to escape and vent off that moisture so that it's not condensing on the underside of the lid and then raining back down on the bees. That's the theory that I was taught when I started beekeeping, and it made sense to me. And so that's what I did. And I've done it that way for several years, and my bees have survived and done just fine. And you'll have those beekeepers that will say that you have to have an upper entrance, you have to ventilate that moisture off, or you'll kill your bees. And they're partly right, because if that warm, moist air condenses on the underside of the lid, it does just that. It rains right back down and drips right back down on the cluster, and wet bees in the winter are dead bees. Now, that's the premise I've always worked under, and my bees have done just fine. I had a couple of years where I didn't lose any hives at all. And I've done this, and I've had years where I've lost hives. Part of beekeeping, though, is trying to figure out the whole beekeeping equation, because there's so many variables to this whole equation that it's really hard to pinpoint what killed my bees. Was it the moisture? Was it the cold? Was it lack of food? Was it, did they not produce enough winter bees? Is the cluster too small? There's just so many things going on that it's really hard to pinpoint. So over the years, I've done a lot of reading. I've done a lot of studying, and one of the people I've run across, I've been always curious of how some of these beekeepers, especially up in Canada, but cold climates, really cold climates, worse than the basin. How do they keep bees? How do they keep them alive all winter? And some of the Canadian guys will overwinter their bees in sheds, and then they keep the shed at a constant temperature of about 40 degrees Fahrenheit. And so their bees are not exposed to that -0, minus whatever temperatures that we sometimes get out here. And one of the guys that I've listened to and watched and kind of followed what he's done, he's a bit of a scientist, a bit of a geek, and a bit of I think he's got an engineering background. And he lives in the Yukon. His name's Etienne Tardif. He's actually the president of the Western Apiculture Society. And he's done talks all over the place, but he lives in the Yukon. And he keeps hives in the Yukon, -40, -50, -60. And he keeps hives alive just fine. He does insulate his hives. So here's where the argument comes in for insulation. He uses rigid foam board for insulation, and he insulates all the way around his hives, probably with about 2 inches of rigid foam board all the way around his hive, and probably about 6 inches of rigid foam board on top of his hive. And he's got sensors and humidity and temperature and weight and CO2. I mean, he's measured everything. He can tell exactly where the cluster is in the hive at any given moment. He can tell how big it is. He can he knows exactly what's going on in that hive without opening it, because he's got so many sensors in the thing. And he overwinters his bees in the Yukon, where they're probably locked in there for 6 months of the year. And they probably only consume, from what he said, somewhere in the neighborhood of 20 to 30 pounds of honey. And if you said, well, I'm going to overwinter my bees on 20 pounds of honey down here in the US, down in the basin, I'd say, well, your bees are going to die because they're going to starve. We generally tell people you need 60 to 70 pounds of honey to get through winter. And like this winter, where it's been so warm, my bees have burned through 60 pounds of honey, and I'm feeding them to keep them alive. So how does this guy do it with 20 to 30 pounds and still keep his bees alive? And it all has to do with that insulation. So he insulates his hives really well, and no upper entrance. And so your inclination is no upper entrance. What happens to the moisture? You've got all this warm, moist air that's filling the hive. What's it going to do? Well, it's going to condense on the coldest surface. And that happens to be in his hives way down low. By the way, he uses screened bottom boards and leaves them open during the winter. Just the way he's got things set up, all that warm, moist air actually escapes out the bottom of the hive, and the warmer air, the bees generate enough heat that they actually do heat the entire hive. And where we're at, we always go, well, the bees don't heat the box. They don't heat the entire box that they're in. They only heat the cluster. So they're not heating this whole space up. and trying to keep that whole space warm. They're only heating the cluster of bees. So his philosophy is way different. And it's primarily based on a lot of upper insulation on the hive and keeping the lid of the hive warmer than the sides of the hive. So what now happens is that warm, moist air rises to the top, but because the lid is warm, it doesn't condense there. And as the warm, moist air flows around to the sides and down, as it cools, then it condenses on the sidewalls of the hive, which is just fine. That's not going to hurt the bees if the water is condensing on those side walls rather than underneath that upper lid. If it condenses there, it's going to rain back down on them. But if it condenses on the sidewalls, then the bees can actually use that water. They need water during the winter, just like anything else, and they can go get it if they need to. The other part of that is his bees don't really form a tight cluster like ours do in the winter. They form a very loose cluster because the insulation keeps enough of the heat inside the hive that they just don't cluster really tight. So there's your argument both ways. Do you want to insulate? If you're going to insulate your hive, then you insulate the top, at least the top. You want the top more insulated than the sides. So what I've done, and I don't have pictures to share of what I've done lately. So I've tried some of that, and I've put some solid foam board insulation on the top of my hives. And most of my hives this year got some, they call it Reflectix. It's like the silver bubble wrap. I don't know if you know what I'm talking about. It's really pretty thin. It just looks like bubble wrap that's silver on both sides. And I've used that in all of my hives, and I've put some of my hives have about an inch and a half rigid foam board on top and no upper entrance. And my bees look really pretty good. In fact, I think they look better this year than they have done for a number of years coming out of winter. Now it's a little early to say that, but they're looking really pretty good from what I've seen so far. Now, is that the insulation, or is that what I've done last fall to get them ready for winter? Did I get that just right? So right now they look really good. Again, that's part of this multivariable equation that is beekeeping. So I'm not ready to say, yes, upper insulation, some sort of upper insulation is the way to go, but I like it so far. So I'm kind of changing my philosophy from no insulation and an upper entrance to at least insulation on the top and no upper entrance. I think if you're going to do insulation on the top, then you probably don't want an upper entrance. The insulation is there to keep the heat in, and if you give an upper entrance, then all that heat escapes right out of the hive, and you gain nothing. But if you're not going to do insulation on your hive, then you've got to do something above the cluster to either vent that moisture off or capture the moisture. And part of those sugar shims that I put on the hive, that sugar absorbs some of the moisture. So it kind of acts as a moisture sink so that it doesn't rain back down on my bees. And I think that's partly why my bees have done okay with no insulation, is that sugar shim actually provides some a place for that moisture to go, and it captures some of the moisture, and then the bees would just reuse it. It makes it a little easier for the bees to use that sugar when they've got some moisture. They've got to dissolve that sugar in order to be able to consume it. They can't consume it dry. So they have to have some water in order to consume that dry sugar. So I don't know which way you want to go. I think there's argument both ways, and I think if you talk to enough beekeepers, you're going to hear some people argue one way or the other.
Okay, I have one more interest. Well, just something that's coming in my head. Last winter versus this winter, totally different stories. If you've got 6 inches of snow on top of your hive, you've kind of got some insulation already.
Yes.
So tell me what you do on a heavy year. I mean, obviously you're still playing around with it and figuring things out as well, but how do you assess insulation need? I mean, you've got a dry, cold winter where you can be in the negatives. You've got a more wet winter, you've got all kinds of winters. This winter is
Exactly.
obviously very weird. So would you do this same type of insulation you're talking about if we end up with 2 feet of snow by January? Or, like, what are you thinking?
I'm thinking either way. I'm I'm I- I'm thinking I'm going to insulate regardless of what the winter looks like.
Sounds
That's the way I'm leaning right the moment, is providing probably 1.5 to 2 inch foam board on top of my hive. I've also experimented with some insulated top covers. Ooh, let me see if I can find a picture of one of those. Okay, this is not my picture, so don't get too. This is Better Bee. It's probably a little small. Maybe there. So these are pre-made rigid foam insulation top covers. So you've got about a 2 inch, 1.5 inch, 2 inch. This is the top cover this is rigid foam filled, and then it's got a second outer cover that also has insulation in it. There's a hole right here that you can plug and unplug if you need to feed, and you can actually take this insulation out and flip it over, and it will give the bees an entrance. You can't see the entrance from there's a hole on the other side of this one. It'll give the bees an upper entrance if you want. So some people like an upper entrance during the summer, some people don't. I do. But during the winter, I'm wondering if I shouldn't close that upper entrance and give them some insulation. So this is one option. This just replaces your standard inner cover and outer cover on your hive. It fits right over top of the top box, and you do have to strap these down or put a brick on it or something, because this top cover will come off in the wind. But that is one option. And I've got a couple of hives that I bought a couple of these just to try. And I don't like the fact that I have to strap them down, or I have to put something on top to keep the lids from blowing off, but they're really convenient. They're kind of pricey. So the set's about $70 here, 68. So I've been playing around with a little bit of Reflectix bubble foil insulation. It's not very thick. It's not really doing a whole lot, but I'm also wondering if upper insulation around here in the heat of the summer wouldn't help keep the hive a tad bit cooler. If you go out on a hot summer day and feel that top cover, it's hot. That sun beating down on it, it's pretty hot. And the bees want the inside of the hive to be somewhere in that 95-degree range. But when it's that sun's beating down on that top of cover, then it's going to get 98, 100 degrees, 105. And that's too hot for the bees. And you'll see them beard on the outside of the hive. And basically the bees go, oh, all right, there's too many bodies in here. We've got to evacuate. And some of the bees will just hang out on the front entrance so that they can get enough air circulation during the summer to cool that hive off. So like I say, I'm kind of rethinking my training or my original thought on, do I use insulation or not? I'm getting to the, I think I'm coming to the conclusion that I like some upper insulation and maybe even upper insulation all year long. I might not do, I've seen people, and I've tried this myself, just take some foam, some rigid foam board and just basically make a box, a sleeve to go slide right down over the hive. And I've done that and it works, but I don't have room to store that much, all those boxes, that insulation all summer long. I don't have room in my shed to do that. So I'm looking for an alternative way to provide my bees some upper insulation without taking all my shed space. Kirk, what's your experience with insulation, non-insulation?
So, I've tried, I do put the black tar paper around the outside. And I've tried, I made kind of like the shim cover you made. I made a similar shim cover with hardware cloth in the bottom, probably 1/2 inch, and put some cedar shavings up in there to try to collect moisture. Seems to work. I don't know if it's the best thing to do or not. I would put underneath that, I would put I did my candy board a little different than you did. I just cast it in one disposable aluminum pan things and made it thick enough that, and I put a little shim between just a 1/2 inch shim between the top frames, and then set that in there, and then it went underneath that. And that seemed to work really good. How do you know though?
Yeah.
You know? But I've never put insulation board on the outside. I guess as you were talking about this, one of my questions for you is, you see around right now some of that, I don't know, they call it moisture board, or some of them call it insulation board, something they're putting inside their under their top cover. Have you looked into that some?
I have not. I
just see them advertising that, or not. I don't know. You just see it around occasionally. Some of them are.
Yeah, occasionally you'll see it. I don't know how much moisture could that really absorb.
It looks pretty condensed to me. I wouldn't think it would absorb that much, but I don't know. I don't know what it's made out of.
Yeah, so that's kind of the hard part with overwintering, is there's so many variables happening here that it's hard to point at one thing and say, okay, this made the difference or this didn't make the difference. Because I've run with upper entrances, no tar paper, no insulation, and done just fine. And I've had bees died that way. And I've had them come out of winter looking really good. And now I've tried a couple of years with some sort of insulation on the top, and I've had a couple of die still. And I've had some that, like right now, I look at my hives and they're all looking really pretty good. And I've put a little bit of extra insulation on some of them. And I think they've consumed less sugar, less honey. I have a couple of hives that haven't even gone into that sugar shim yet because they haven't consumed their honey down below. Now, is that because they had upper insulation, an extra foam board on top? Or is that because they're Carniolans and they just don't consume that much during the winter? Saskatraz are supposedly about the same way, consume very little during the winter, whereas an Italian will eat themselves out of house and home. And my bees are kind of a mix, and I can definitely tell a hive that has genetics that lean more towards the Italian and hives that lean more towards the Carniolan. When I started, I had 10 hives that were Italian and 10 hives that were Carniolan. And coming out of winter, I'll have several hives that are rather small. In fact, small enough that I'm thinking, oh, you're not going to do anything. You're not going to make any honey. You're not going to build up fast enough to do anything this year. And then I'll have other hives that are just boiling with bees. Well, those that are just boiling with bees at this time of year, that's an Italian trait. It's nice to see all those bees, but they consume a lot of resources, so you really have to feed them, which is fine if you just know that that's what you've got to do. And then the Carniolan, I've had hives that just, there's 4 or 5 frames of bees and you think, oh, they're just not going to make it. And I'll come back the end of May and I can't tell the difference. Somewhere along the line, those Carniolans just decided to kick it in gear. And when they do, they just raise brood like mad, and just population just explodes. And you think, where did these bees come from? And Saskatraz are, from what I understand, are supposed to be that way. I've actually got a couple of hives out here that have some, that I put some Saskatraz queens in last fall. And I'm hoping they make it so I can kind of tell what they look like coming out of winter. But so is it the bees? Is it the insulation? And then, if your mite treatments were off last fall and you kind of missed the boat with mite treatments, then it doesn't matter what you do. You could insulate till you could have 6 feet of insulation around your hives. If they're sick from disease from not controlling your mites, then it doesn't matter. So in my mind, my beekeeping year starts in August. As soon as I pull my honey, to me, that's the end of my beekeeping year and the beginning of the next one, because that's when I'm starting to raise those winter bees. That's when I'm raising the bees that will raise my winter bees. So I start my beekeeping year in end of August, and I'm trying to get those bees as healthy as I can so that they're healthy enough to raise healthy winter bees, which are now going to be able to survive this 4 or 5 months of some years nasty cold and this year not so bad. And then if they're healthy, it doesn't seem to matter whether I've insulated or not. They'll come out of winter just fine. So does it matter? I don't know yet. I wish somebody would really do a definitive study and say this is the best way to do it. But it doesn't exist yet. So until some scientist really wants to study that for a couple of years and has the data to prove it, I think you'll get an argument at any bee meeting about whether you need to insulate your hives or not. The commercial guys aren't going to do it. They don't. It's too hard for them to insulate all their hives. They can't do it. So,
but Glade, aren't most of the big guys taking their bees to California now? I mean,
well,
that's where, listen, a lot of them are doing that. So
yeah,
they're out in the winter.
Yeah, they are. If you're a commercial beekeeper, then you're taking your bees to California. In fact, probably out of I think the statistics say we have like 2.8 million beehives in the US, and probably 2.6 million beehives are in California right now. And the rest of those that aren't, the other couple of 100,000, are all the backyard beekeepers and the small sideliners. Most commercial beekeepers are taking their bees to California to pollinate almonds, and they're probably making half their income off of almond pollination. It's the only thing blooming in America, and for the beekeeping industry, almonds set the stage for the entire year. And you kind of think, well, that seems kind of silly that the beekeeping industry is so reliant on that almond pollination window. But it really is, because if you think about it, you have all these hives going to California this time of year. Those bees are building up and producing some really nice hives. Almond pollen is really good for bees. So it's nutritious, and they build quickly on it. So these beekeepers are going to do the almond pollination. They'll be in the almond groves for about 3 weeks, and then they have to get them out, at which point they'll most likely split their hives. There's queen breeders right now raising queens, and we can't even think of raising queens at least till the end of May. But in California, they're raising queens right now. And as soon as those bees come out of almonds, the commercial guys will split their hives. Sometimes they'll split a 10 frame hive 3 ways, 4 ways, if they're big enough. And so they'll take, they take one beehive into almond pollination, and sometimes they come out with at least 2, if not 3, and maybe even 4. And those hives will come back to wherever they live in the US. And I do mean all across the US. So all those beehives are being trucked from East Coast to West Coast, and then from West Coast back to East Coast. And as those go back to wherever they live, excuse me, that's where all the nooks and all the packages come from. So if you've bought a package or a nook from somebody that's a commercial beekeeper, the reason they had those is because of almond pollination in California. Starting here in end of February, 1st of March is usually when they start. And most of them are staging their bees right now, trying to get them in the groves, get them situated, get them settled. But because there's nothing else blooming down there, most of them are feeding their bees right now. They're having to put syrup on them and pollen patties on them because there's almost nothing else blooming down there. Soon as those almonds bloom, and if they have a good year where the weather cooperates and the bees can fly, then it's a good bee season, and it'll be a good year for all the beekeepers across the US, because now those commercial guys have nooks and packages available. If they get rained out, then it kind of sets the stage for the rest of the year for those beekeepers, and they're scrambling. They don't have enough bees to sell. They've got them promised to, packages and nooks promised, and they don't have them to sell. So almond pollination is a big deal for the commercial guys. I don't do it. And, most the backyard guys don't do it. Some of the small sideliners will do it. I think you're going to have in the neighborhood of 50 to 75 hives to even make it worth it. And even then you're going to have to jump on the truck of somebody that's got more hives than that. I know some of the beekeepers in the state. I know one out on the Wasatch Front. He actually takes his hives to Idaho and overwinters his hives in potato sheds in Idaho until about middle of January sometime, and then he'll pull them out of the sheds in Idaho, truck them to California, and build them up for almond pollination. And then he'll split and bring them back and sell nooks when he gets back. Kind of interesting when you start following the money around a little bit, what all those commercial guys are doing. And they probably do make half their income off of 3 weeks in almonds. You're talking somewhere in the neighborhood of $175 to $200 per hive for 3 weeks. All right. So any more questions? You'll have to unmute yourself. There you go, Rachel.
Okay. Am I there?
Yeah, you're there now.
My first time speaking on a Zoom. I watch a lot of them, but I don't talk. Lorraine had some more questions, and I think she got called away. One of them was about queens, and you mentioned queens. What do you do if you need a queen now?
You're in trouble.
If the need should arise.
If you need a queen now, you're in trouble.
Okay.
Well,
I'm
folks in Hawaii.
Say that.
Hawaii. Wow.
Yeah.
They call the folks in Hawaii.
Glad. Yep. Call the folks in Hawaii. They'll ship you a queen.
Yeah, probably cost you $150, but you'll have one.
Yeah, well, that's true. Or you could save the $150 and buy a nook or a package.
True.
Queens this time of year, it's not gonna happen. If your hive is queenless this time of year, the best thing you can do is just combine what's left of the bees with another hive. That's why having more than one hive is advantageous. And that's why I advocate for people to have at least 2 hives, if not 3 to 4 hives. Just so that you've got a backup. Because if that's your only hive, what are you going to do? You're done. But if you've got another hive, at least you can kind of save the bees. You'll boost that other hive in population. Then hopefully you can turn around come spring and split that hive back out.
What if you need a queen in April-ish?
April,
probably still a nuke.
In April, you might find somebody that's got a queen. These commercial guys are coming back, and they may have an extra queen for that they'd sell you. They're going to they'd rather sell you a nook, but
right.
They may have an extra queen that they're going to sell you. That's one thing I'd kind of like to, as everybody in this group kind of gets some experience, I'd like to see the group raise their own queens, and somewhere along the line, hopefully one of us has got an extra queen sitting on the side if you need a queen. For me, I don't really start raising queens until at least the end of May. So if you think about raising queens, when do the bees raise queens? If we just left them to their own design and said, okay, you guys requeen, when are they going to raise queens? They're going to do that when resources are abundant. That's the best time for them to swarm, right? So swarm season around here starts maybe 1st of May, mid-May, and we'll go through towards the end of June. So that's the window where the bees are going to raise queens and want to swarm and want to divide. So in my mind, that's the best time to raise queens and make splits. And if you're wanting to grow, that's the time frame to do it. Now, around here, you have to be really careful, because if you try to do it too early, we can get some poor weather the end of May. I mean, how many times has it snowed after Memorial Day around here, or at least had a hard frost right after Memorial Day or Memorial Weekend? We get this nasty cold spell. So I usually wait till the 1st of June for my queens to be ready to mate. But I'd like to see us as a group get to the point where, you know, several of us have some extra queens, an extra nook off to the side that we can go, oh, you need a queen? I've got a queen over here. What I'd really like to do is get to the point where you guys are, that we're all raising queens and we're swapping queens a little bit. We can get more into that, but there's some things I'd like to do genetic wise that I think would help everybody. We have the biggest problem in the beekeeping world right now is the varroa mite. You go to any meeting and they're going to talk about varroa mites, because that's generally what's killing bees. And our solution up to this point has been a chemical solution, some sort of miticide to put in the hive to kill the mites and hopefully not kill the bees. And we don't have that many choices. Our options are very limited. You've got amitraz and thiamol and oxalic acid and formic acid and hopguard, and that's about it. And each one has their place and has their advantages, but they also have their disadvantages. And I just don't think the chemical solution is really the answer to solving our mite problem. I think our solution is coming up with bees that can handle the mites on their own. So I'm looking into queens that are VSH queens, varroa sensitive hygiene queens. And I've brought in a couple of queens this last year that have this varroa sensitive hygiene trait. So what the trait of the bees is the worker bees sense that there's a mite in the cell with the pupae, so in the capped cell where the mite reproduces, and the bees come along and uncap the cell and open it up, and if the pupae's infected with a virus, with a disease, they may actually pull that pupae out and drag it out of the hive and get rid of it. If it's not, if that mite's not reproducing in the cell, sometimes they'll just recap the cell. And this uncapping, recapping behavior seems to disrupt the reproductive cycle of the mites. So much so that some of these queen breeders that are breeding for varroa sensitive hygiene are getting to the point where they don't treat their hives for mites at all. And that's where we need to be. So what I'd like to see eventually in the next few years with this group is we all get to the point where we have some varroa sensitive hygiene stock, whether that's an Italian stock or a Carniolan stock or a mix or a mutt or saskatraz or a blend of all of them. I'm not sure it really matters. Technically, I've read some studies that say most of the bees in the US are genetically identical. They may have, ones may look a little bit different, and you might have a few traits that seem to lean one way or another, but genetically they're all the same. But these guys are are breeding specifically for varroa sensitive hygiene. And I think if we got to the point where we, as a group, were actually raising our own queens and specifically selecting for queens and hives that display this varroa sensitive hygiene, I think we'd all be better off in the long run. And we might not be able to eliminate the treatments that we do, but I treat my hives. I'll do an oxalic acid treatment. In fact, I just did one a couple of weeks ago when it was warm, a vaporization, and I'll probably do either a formic or a thiamol treatment in the spring. And I'll put some extended oxalic, extended release pads of oxalic acid in during the summer. And then come fall, I'm either going to do, again, formic acid or the thiamol, whichever one I didn't use in the spring, I'll use it in the fall. And then right before my bees go into winter, so end of August or end of October, I'm going to hit them again with an oxalic acid vaporization. So I'm really treating my bees like 5 times during the year to keep the mite levels low. If I can just eliminate even 1 or 2 of those treatments, I'm better off, in my opinion. And I think our bees are healthier. So maybe that's a pie in the sky goal, but eventually I'd like to see all of us have some bee stock that has a varroa sensitive hygiene trait. And if I raise 2 queens and you raise 2 queens and we swap, your bees are going to mate with drones from your area and my bees are going to mate with drones from my area. And we're going to keep a genetic diversity that's also been shown to help maintain that varroa sensitive hygiene trait. So Laura's asking, so Carniolans and Italians have VSH traits automatically? No, not automatically. They have to be selected for, but it can be in the Carniolan line and it can be in the Italian line. If you look around, if you really do some digging as you buy queens, if you specifically look for VSH queens, they're out there. They are available. Sometimes you pay a little bit more, but they are out there in both Carniolan, Italian. The Russian stock is supposedly naturally has some varroa sensitive hygiene traits. I don't know much about the Russian stock. They have a reputation of being a little bit more aggressive, a little more defensive than the Italian or the Carniolans. But I've also heard that that's just not true either, that they're just as gentle and they do just fine. So my bees are a cross. There's some mix between Carniolan and Italian and whoever else is near me. If they've got something a little different, maybe a Caucasian or something, or a Saskatraz or whatever, my bees are mutts, but they're locally adapted mutts. And I'm getting my bees to the point where I'm feeling like there's some pretty good bees now, and they hold up quite well in the winter.
Thank you for that, Glade. We will definitely want to replace our queen this spring because I think she's like 3 years old at this point. And so I will definitely look for the VSH, queens, well, when we're looking.
Yes. I think that's a good idea. I think that's the path. As an industry, we need to really concentrate on is let's, instead of putting more chemicals in our hive to kill these mites, let's find a bee that can handle the mites by themselves, or at least cut down on the number of treatments that we have to do. I think it's going to be years down the road before we finally get to the point where we don't have to treat. But even if I can eliminate 1 or 2 treatments a year, it's money saved, it's effort saved, it's time saved. It's I think it's healthier for the bees if they can do it on their own. But it's going to take a while to do that. And where we have a commercial beekeeper in our area, I guarantee they've got bees not far from yours. And I know they've got bees not far from mine. But I think over time, we can improve the stock that's local. And as we all get familiar with keeping bees alive and raising our own queens, that's when you become sustainable as a beekeeper, and you're not having to buy queens and bring them in. If you can learn to raise your own queens, then I think those are better queens than you can bring in. However, we need to bring in that VSH trait and work that into the local stock. So it's going to take a while to get there, but I think in the long run, I think that's a better option for all of us across, whether it's just the basin or not. I think it's better for the whole industry to really lean that direction. And there's some really interesting things coming down the pipe when it comes to VSH. There's some testing that's happening. I don't know if who's heard of UBO?
I have.
Who is that?
Frank.
Oh, Frank. Sorry, I didn't recognize your voice, Frank.
Yeah, and you see where Randy Oliver's got where Oliveris is going to start raising these Golden West queens that he's been breeding that have that VHS trait.
Yes, I did just see that not too long ago. And Randy Oliver would be, if I was buying a queen, by dang, his queens are going to be good queens. And if they've got a VSH trait to them, those are going to be good queens. So Randy Oliver, sorry, and Oliveira's, two separate entities there, are both in California. I think if you look on Oliveira's website, they also have VSH stock.
Yeah, they're I think they're the commercial producer for
Randy.
For Randy, yeah.
They very well could be.
And it said if you go to their website, it says limited stock. So yeah. I suspect they probably already sold out for the year, but who knows?
Yeah, who knows? Where I got my queens from, I bought mine from Corey Stevens in Missouri.
Okay, yeah.
Corey has been he's been raising a VSH stock for about 10 years now. And it's not just a matter of I'm going to go check these hives. This hive has a low mite count. This one has a high mite count. They're actually doing what's called a Harbo assay. It's John Harbo is kind of the author of this test that they do. And basically what happens is they go in and they pull a frame of capped brood out of the hive, and the brood has to be in that purple-eyed stage and actually changing color. So this brood is just 2 or 3 days from emerging out of the cell. And what they actually do is they go in with some tweezers and a magnifying glass, and they pull out the pupae. And as they do that, they're watching really carefully, and they're looking at the pupae that they've pulled out to see if there's any mites on it. And they're looking in the cell that they've just opened and pulled that pupae out of to see if there's any mites in there. And what they're looking for is not just the foundress mite, the female mite that went in there. They're looking for, did she reproduce while she was in the cell? And they go in and they pull out 100 pupae out of one frame. And if they don't find any mites, then they pull another 100 out. And they score the hive based on whether or not the mites are reproducing in the cells. And by doing that, they're selecting bees that have this uncapping, recapping behavior, which seems to be enough to disrupt the reproduction of the mites. And he's done this so long enough that his bees are getting to the point where he may still have mites, but they're not reproducing in the cells. And that's what we need. So along with that, he's there's kind of a side study going on here. Phoebe Snyder and Kara Wagner, I can't think of where Kara's from. Can't remember. They've been working on something called UBO. It stands for unhealthy brood odor. And what they've found is they've found the actual chemical makeup of that brood that is unhealthy, or brood that's infected with some sort of disease, will emit certain chemicals, scents, phenols, and they've been able to isolate that scent, that odor of unhealthy brood that's inside the cap cell. So by being able to isolate that smell, they've been able to manufacture that actual smell. And then they go into a hive and they'll put a little round piece of PVC pipe over an area, and they'll spray this unhealthy brood odor on top of the cappings on a frame. And then they'll take the frame, put it back in the hive, leave it for 2 hours, pull the frame back out, and then they'll re-examine that same area where they sprayed this unhealthy brood odor, and they can tell. And what they're looking for is, did the bees uncap those cells, or did they just leave it? Did they ignore it? Did they not do anything with it? And they've been able to isolate, again, traits of bees, lines of bees, where they're very good about going in there, and wherever they've sprayed, the bees have come along and uncapped everything to check to see if it's okay. And that behavior of uncapping to see if there's something wrong with the pupae in the cell is also seems to apply to mites, because mites are transmitting the diseases that are killing the bees. It's not necessarily the mites themselves, it's the diseases they transmit. So Corey Stevens and Kara Wagner got together and said, well, let's use your test on my bees and my test on your bees and see what happens, and see if there's a correlation between the two. And there was a very strong correlation between the two. Bees that have this uncapping behavior seem to fare better, not only with varroa mites, but also with some of the other diseases, maybe European foul brood and chalk brood and sac brood. And so they're finding that bees that do this hygienic behavior, they're healthier. And so it's really kind of interesting to watch this all develop in the world. And this unhealthy brood odor that they've come up with is now just coming to market, to where you can purchase that. And it would be something that maybe us as a group would want to go in together and say, all right, we're going to test our bees. We're going to go in together and buy the kit to test. The kit's not, it's not overly pricey, but I think 10 tests is like $200 or something for 10 tests. But maybe we go in and we split the cost or something, and some of us test 3 or 4 hives and somebody else tests 3 or 4 hives. And we start isolating bees that have this hygienic trait of uncapping, recapping. And if we can do that locally with our own stock, or even if we need to bring in stock from Randy Oliver or Oliveras or Corey Stevens or somebody else that's got some VSH lines, then as we bring those in and we start dispersing those genetics in the area, then your bees are going to produce drones that have this hygienic stock, and my bees are going to mate with your drones, and we're going to start to gain on this trait that I think we really want in our bees in order to not have to treat with chemicals as much. Does that make sense? Am I talking way over everybody's head? I've been following this for quite a while now, and just kind of watching what's happening, and it's really, to me, it's interesting. But I'm a bee geek, so.
Hey, Glade, I have a question for you.
Okay.
What do you think of bee weavers out of Texas? Because we've gotten queens from them, and they haven't treated their bees for Varroa since 2000.
Okay, so there's probably another line. Do the bee weaver queens is that what they're exhibiting? Is this uncapping, recapping trait? My guess is, yeah, probably to some extent that's what they're doing.
Yeah, I haven't gone. They have where you can go down there and do like the seminars and go through their beehives with them, and they teach you. I just know that they haven't treated for Varroa since 2000. So we were like, hey, let's try some of their queens. That was about 4 or 5 years ago. And then last year we tried Saskatraz just to kind of, because we are kind of rebels. We don't treat for Varroa, and we see how long we can get our bees to go. And we've gotten up to 3 years before. And so I do like some of the natural stuff, make my own honeybee healthy with essential oils. And just because I'm kind of the same way, I'm like, there's got to be another thing. Is it what they call Africanized, but it's really not, And I'm kind of on this, I don't know as much as you do, but I'm definitely interested in getting educated. And that's why I'm always looking for how to get a hold of some bees that already have some of that stuff and just play with them in the backyard and see what happens. So I just wanted to ask you if you had ever looked at bee weavers, if you knew what their process was.
I don't know what their process is. I've heard of bee weavers, and I've heard both ways. Oh, they're just gentle, they're fine. And I've heard, no, they're meaner than heck. So I don't know.
We've had some mean hives. Yeah, definitely they're aggressive, but it seems to me in the research I've done, obviously, as you know, I'm an amateur, the more aggressive bees tend to have less of a Varroa problem. And I don't know if that's all the way across the board, obviously, but just kind of what I've come up with lately. They weren't super aggressive when they had queens with them. It was when we moved them or when we split them that we had problems. So
they get grumpy if they don't have a queen.
Buck-fast?
Are they a buck-fast derivative? I don't know.
I think bee weavers are, and I think the common consensus is the second generation are pretty nasty.
Yeah,
if you let them requeen themselves, I don't know. I had some once, and I know that I didn't realize what was happening at the time, but I think they requeened themselves, and when they did, they got downright ornery. You couldn't even walk out by the hive without getting hammered. They start bouncing off of you and everything else.
Yeah, that was kind of our experience when we moved. We moved houses, and we bought a house kitty corner across the street over here on this little 750 North Street. And man, the people were moving in over at the other house we moved out of, and they were getting kamikazed for like 3 days.
Ooh.
Those bees were rough. but they were super healthy and super hardy. So, I don't know.
Yeah, it's kind of a trade-off, I guess. Huh?
Yeah, a little bit of a trade-off there. I want calm bees. I want nice bees. I don't like getting stung.
Yeah.
I mean, we all get stung, but and I've like Corey Stevens, well, even Randy Oliver, if you watch him work his bees, half the time he doesn't even have a shirt on. He doesn't wear a veil most of the time and never wears gloves. I want bees that are gentle enough that I can go out and work without feeling like I'm going to get just hammered. So, and I know the queens I bought from Corey Stevens, I've seen him work his hives in videos, and he never wears gloves. He'll wear a suit, but he never wears gloves. And I'm okay. That's kind of where I want to be. I wear a suit because I don't like them stinging my face. I can deal with them stinging my fingers, but so I'll work hives gloveless, but I don't want them stinging my face and right up in my face all the time. So I honestly don't know that much about the Bee Weaver line. I've heard a few things, but I don't know enough to really speak on those.
Would it be an interest if, I mean, I don't know that much about obviously I keep saying I don't know anything because I really don't, but if they have this, they've not been treated, is that some part of that genetics that we might want to try and figure out how to get those bees to a point where we can use the good part of them, but also keep them calm?
Yeah. And I don't know enough about, how long would it take to do that? How long? I don't know. I guess I would rather, just me personally, I would rather start with a stock that's already gentle and work from that direction. Could you get the bee weaver, second generation, third generation, so that they're not as aggressive? Yeah, every time you breed from that next generation, they're going to breed with drones from your area. And when queens mate, they don't mate with just one drone. They mate with hopefully 15, 20, 25 drones. And so they're going to get genetics from, 20 different drones, and those genetics are going to get spread out through your hive. So when you get in a hive and you look at all your bees, they're not all sisters. They're stepsisters. Some of them are sisters, true sisters, but others are really stepsisters. Multiple drones in the hive. I think the most documented number of drone genetics that they found is something like 80 different drones mated with one queen, which is crazy. But they typically say drones will mate, or the queen will mate with somewhere 15, 20, 25 drones. So if they're mating with local stock, is that enough to, can you get them to the point where they're not so defensive? Maybe. I don't know. I'm not. That's out of my league.
Makes sense. I don't know either. I just thought it was kind of a promising thing, but yeah.
But you're right. They're obviously, if they're not trading their bees, they're obviously doing something. Those bees have got some trait that's keeping the mites at bay. And in our area, with a commercial beekeeper local, we may never get to that point because he's going to treat his bees.
Yeah,
they're always going to treat their bees, and it may or may not interest him to bring in stock that has a VSH trait. I don't know. But I think if we as some of the backyard beekeepers, and you might, you might be in an area where you're not getting a lot of pressure from other beehives near you. I know where my beehives are, and I know there's beehives not very far within flying distance. And so I know I'm going to get pressure from other people's beehives, the commercial guy and backyard beekeepers. And all it takes is one person not to stay on top of their mites, and those mites will spread to my hives. So
We did do a mite check in the fall because it was our first season having those Saskatraz. And so we thought, well, might check them. And if we see anything, any numbers that look scary, we're going to treat them. If not, we're going to see how they fare through the winter and then come out in the spring and see where they are again. It was just kind of more of experimental for us because they were talking about these hygienic bees, So I thought, well, the best way to tell is just to check them. And so we haven't been running these hives untreated for, more than just the last season. So,
well, and I think that's not a bad approach. If you want to be in the side that I don't want to treat my bees at all, I'm fine with that. That's okay. But I still think you need to do a mite wash every once in a while and know where your mite counts are at. And personally, I think I'd love not to treat my bees. I'd love not to have to ever treat my bees, but I don't think I can do that because I have so many other beekeepers around me. And it takes one that doesn't take care of their bees. But
yeah, I don't want to perpetuate the problem either. We do have beekeepers on our street, and they know that we're kind of experimenting over here. But like I said, if we do a mite wash, or some people use the powdered sugar, we found that one doesn't seem to work quite so great.
It doesn't.
And so we will do a wash in the spring, and if the varroa is a problem, then we definitely will treat at some point. But
and I think that's a very viable way to go. Is I'm going to treat when necessary, but I'm going to stay informed as to what my mite count is. I'm not just going to guess and say, oh, they look healthy, because it takes about 3 weeks for a healthy hive that's infested with mites to crash. Yeah, in about 3 weeks, they can crash from looking like, oh, population's great, they look wonderful. But if they're really infested with mites, they'll crash in about 3 weeks.
Yeah, well, I'll keep you posted on what goes on this spring. But yeah, I'm just kind of learning, but I also don't want to make things worse for other people. So I think that's why it's important to check. I'm kind of like, we have treated in the past. We've done Apigard, we've done oxalic. We've had Justin Mills come to our house multiple times and show us all the ins and outs of everything. And he's taught us how to treat. It was more of I want to check and only treat when I absolutely have to see if I can mitigate some of the treatment is my goal.
Yeah. I think that's a viable option. I really do.
Hey, Glade, this is Kirk.
Yeah.
Hey, I just wanted to tell you thanks for getting this back up and going again, and being willing to work with everybody on new ideas and things that just make it better for us. We appreciate your willingness to help everybody out and make it better for all of us.
Well, and that's really my goal, is just to make it better for all of you. And, if you enjoy keeping bees like I do, then it becomes fun. But when you're constantly battling disease and problems and queen issues, and you just don't have any resources, then it's not very fun anymore. And I'd like to get to the point where we all kind of go, oh yeah, you've got a problem. Hey, I've got something that can help you out. To me, it's a little more about building a community of beekeepers than it is just keeping bees. And I appreciate everybody's time and coming on. And I will say that the Utah Beekeepers Association annual conference is coming up the 23rd and 24th of this month. So here in a couple of weeks, I would encourage you to go if you can make it. It's in Salt Lake. It'll be at the Hyatt Hotel in Cottonwood Heights, right there at the mouth of Little Cottonwood Canyon. And I say that for two reasons. One, I think it helps for you to get to know some of the other beekeepers in the state. I've started to make a few friends outside of the area and bounce a few ideas off some of them that live in maybe a little different climate than we do. And sometimes they're, Cache Valley or somewhere where it's just as cold as we are. And it's kind of interesting to get to talk to some of these other beekeepers and find out what they're working on. And I also do it because I'm on the board of directors for the state at the moment. And we'd like to see as many come as possible that would like to come. We're going to have, I just blanked her name. I'm going to have to go look it up. I can't think of her name. I've heard her speak before.
Is it Becky Masterman?
Becky Masterman, that's her name. She should be a really good speaker. Yeah, she's from University of Minnesota, and she should be a really good speaker. She's enjoyable to listen to. Dr. Dewey Karen is one of also well-known bee researcher in the US. And trying to think who else. I'm not sure who else is on the agenda, but those two for sure are on the agenda. Both of them should be really good speakers. And then we'll have somebody like Joey Caputo from the state. He's the state bee inspector. He'll be there and have a presentation, and we'll have hopefully some comment time on some of the things that are happening in the industry. There's some rule changes with regards to oxalic acid, and probably less known to everybody, and I'm not sure I understand everything. Right now, the beekeeping industry as a whole is essentially under the EPA when it comes to pesticide use, because the chemicals we use for varroa mites are considered pesticides. So that falls under the EPA. And there's push to move that to the FDA because we're producing a consumable product, and the rules may change quite a bit for beekeepers and to what we can and can't do. It may be a good thing, it may not be a good thing, and we're not sure exactly as an industry where that's going to fall out. It could be good, it could be bad. But those are a couple of things that I know of that are kind of out there in the powers that be as far as beekeeping is concerned. We don't have a lot of options for mite treatments, and trying to get something approved is really expensive and really difficult to get it pushed through the EPA, and it takes forever. So the beekeeping industry's, pushing to figure out how we can maybe help ourselves a little more. Things like oxalic acid. Oxalic acid is a natural occurring organic acid. It's in the food you eat already. It's in broccoli. It's in cauliflower. It's already in the beehive. And so treating with oxalic acid, in my mind, is one of those that is really a non-issue. Randy Oliver has shown with his tests that he's done that it does not stay in the hive very long at all, as in days. the oxalic acid naturally breaks down into just natural chemicals, and it's not an issue with the bees or the public health or but the regulated or the approved dosage for oxalic acid has been shown to not be near enough to kill the mites. I think the approved dose is like 2 grams per brood box, and they're really showing that it needs to be more like 4 grams per brood box to be effective. So there's some changes that have happened recently that allow for maybe some personal use of oxalic acid. And I'm not I'm not entirely versed on what the regulation is now, but hopefully the meeting this month with the Utah Beekeepers Association will hopefully be able to go through some of that and everybody learn together. And I'll bring back whatever they kind of talk about. You can usually kind of listen to some of the speakers afterwards once they get them the recordings edited and posted and things. It'll be a while, but all right. Well, thanks everybody for coming on. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Glade. We appreciate it.
Thank you for your support.
Thanks, Clay.
If you've got questions or things you'd like to talk about next month, let's put them in the Basin Beekeepers chat or on the Facebook page, or send me a message. I'm open to whatever you want to talk about. I think you'll probably want to be talking about, what do I do for splits, and what am I going to do for queens? And next month we're going to be hard and heavy into March, and we're going to start thinking about, okay, let's get these bees built up and ready for the nectar flow come May. All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a good night.
Thank you. Bye.